Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the Social Enterprise Franchise Models webinar. My name is Niamh O'Sullivan, and I'm the Manager of Social Enterprise and Community Benefits at Bisocial Canada. We're so glad you're all here today to learn from some experts and build momentum on the social enterprise sector across Canada. Before we dive in, I would like to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge that I live, work, and learn on the unceded, traditional, and ancestral Squamish and Lil'wat nations. We endeavour to make this more than just words and reflect on what we can do to repair Indigenous relations both nationally and internationally. As many of you know, Bisocial Canada is a national organisation, and lots of you on this call today are joining from across the country, so please feel free to include in the chat the lands that you're calling from. As this is a larger group today, I see most people are already muted, but if somehow you are unmuted and there's some background noise, could you please put yourself back on mute so we can hear everyone that's speaking. And if you have a question or a comment, please pop it in the chat, or you can raise your hand using the emoji icons in the lower ribbon. Hopefully at the end of this webinar, we'll have some time left for a Q&A. Now, I'd like to welcome you all to our first Social Enterprise Learning webinar for 2024. We have many activities planned for this year, and we want to kick off with the topic that we know many of you will find really interesting. Today, we're going to be discussing social enterprise franchise models. So what is that? How do you do it? And we're going to hear from some leaders to break down the best practices for this. I know many of you in the audience are leaders within social enterprise space, but I want to begin with Bisocial Canada's definition of what a social enterprise is, so everyone has a clear understanding of where we're coming from. We consider a social enterprise to be a business that sells goods or services. They have a social, cultural, or environmental mission, and that the majority of profits are reinvested back into their mission, creating a community asset over individual owner and shareholder wealth. Now, the reason we wanted to host a webinar on this topic today is to discuss what are the possibilities available for social enterprises, and perhaps are any of you thinking of scaling or growing? And is the franchise model appropriate option for you to explore? So you can see alongside me my two guest speakers today, Carla Leon and Rebecca Sherbino. Thank you both so much for being part of today's webinar. I'm going to invite each of you to introduce yourselves, tell a bit about your organization, what do you sell, what's your mission, and who do you help? Carla, maybe I'll start with you.
I was going to give it to Rebecca, but okay, I'll go. So I'm Carla Leon. I am the CEO of Just Like Family Home Care. And what we sell, or what we support families and their loved ones in aging in place, as well as those who need some additional support. So any multi-abled, maybe discharged from the hospital. So it can be anything from simply meal prep, groceries, a light housekeeping, all the way to 24/7 care and respite to support families. I would say the amazing thing about our franchise partners is that every single one of them believes wholeheartedly that their job is to make a difference in people's lives every day. It's quite rewarding.
That's amazing. Thanks so much. I'm really excited for today's conversation and learning more. Rebecca, I'll pass it over to you.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Rebecca Sherbino. I'm one of the co-founders and the executive director of The Raw Carrot. The Raw Carrot sells gourmet soup and artisan products. We empower individuals who face barriers to traditional employment to secure their own livelihoods through the dignity of work. So we create jobs for adults on social assistance, and the vehicle through which we create those jobs is through making homemade gourmet goods.
Thanks, Rebecca. So when we talk about social enterprise franchise models, there's a whole spectrum. I'm going to share my screen, and maybe Carla, you can walk us through what exactly the options are. Are you seeing my screen?
Yeah. Oh, yes, we can. And this is exciting. So we're going to throw this in the chat as well for a link for future reference. But it's really this idea of when we look at scale is how do we want to grow? And so our premise for both Rebecca and I is that we don't need to own everything. I think it's a healthy place to start. So you can see in the flexibility to control, the control is actually wholly owned everything. Right. And so we're used to seeing mergers and acquisitions and branches in there. But you can actually do this beautiful growth model of just affiliation. So it's more relational than transactional. We actually have a relationship. We're affiliated with each other. And there's all these wonderful different models of scale that you can take your existing business model and social enterprise model and consider any of these. And so you're going to see accreditations in there. You can have an association, the federated model, which Boys and Girls Clubs is affiliated with, strategic partnerships that you have a signed agreement of how you work together. Then there's just licensing, and then there's just franchising. And then you can actually build a business together with two. So you actually have that incorporated together as a JV. And then you can actually still have control, but you actually pay someone else to do the work for you. So that's the subcontracting, you're getting them to do it. And then if you actually don't, you're not as concerned about the control, so it becomes even more flexible. That's when you have the dissemination. So you actually kind of, you allow people to have their own flexibility in how things are handled. So that's the open sourcing, which a lot of nonprofits provide that. Just training, the consultancy, and then the loose network. So you can see you go from dissemination to wholly owned. You get more and more control throughout that. And then today we're going to talk about the social licensing and social franchising as a really unique model as an affiliation model.
Thank you. Well, there's definitely a lot of options here. Rebecca, where does the raw carrot fit in this?
Yeah, so the raw carrot is quote unquote a social franchise, and this does create some confusion, because I think when you look at this like picture in front of you of the continuum of where you can go, it's a little bit complex. But we call ourselves a social franchise because people understand the thought of franchising. They know that means replication, right? So we call ourselves a social franchise, but technically we license. So this is where the element of control becomes either more or less important. So although we have 4 social enterprise sites in Southwestern Ontario, all of which does the same thing. Oh, I'm breaking up.
No, okay. I can hear you perfectly.
Can you? Okay. I'll try to talk a little bit more slowly. Maybe that'll help too. This element of control, we didn't feel like we needed to have full control over the process and the brand of what we were trying to do. So, we wanted to replicate the model and the operational pieces. We wanted to create more employment through jobs, but we didn't feel that we needed to have the ultimate control over what that looked like. And so although we considered franchising and what that technically entails, we felt like if we licensed sites to use our model, to use our tools and sort of proprietary information, that we didn't necessarily need to franchise.
Mm-hmm. And that's what's so great about social enterprises. Ultimately, the biggest goal is to create more impact. And it's like, why start from scratch? This is a great opportunity. Okay, this exists. We know it makes money. We know it creates employment opportunities and it creates more inclusive skills training opportunities for people that have been historically marginalized. Carla, I'd love to hear from you. How does it work at Just Like Family Home Care?
Yeah, I love it, because what Rebecca said is so on point, because you know what franchising is? It's more expensive to set up too. Right? So to set up a franchise, actually fall into all the franchise law. So what we ended up doing is we actually bought Just Like Family Home Care, and we didn't start it from scratch. So we bought it as an existing franchise model. So we didn't have to go through the decision making, which Rebecca's going to talk about, how to get the first one off the ground. We actually started when we bought it with 27 locations already. So it was about actually acquiring a business and then learning how to do franchising and growing from there. But we are a franchise. There is a lot more legalities that are involved in that. And the big thing that we do as a franchise model is we are about processes. We train and support our franchise partners in following processes and rigor. And so in the home care space that does have regulations and legislation around there and the vulnerable sector, it's really important that we have that extra support. The other thing is also the rules and branding guidelines around the brand itself. So we have a trademark and ensuring that that's used appropriately. So yes, that we are the franchise. So you can see, what I love is that Rebecca and I are side by side with social licensing and social franchising. So you can see, even in one step over on this continuum, how we operate so differently.
Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing here a second, and we're going to put this link in the chat so anyone can access it again in the future. I guess if someone wants to be part of this, if someone wants to buy a license or buy a franchise from you, like, how does that work?
Jump in. So for the Raw Carrot, again, because we're licensing, that looks like a partnership for us. This is a process not only of somebody deciding that they want to just launch a Raw Carrot site, but we look for value-aligned organizations that are really doing a few things that we feel is very similar to what we're doing. So that, you know, to us, that includes, like, we're not only an organization that's working on skills training, we are looking for permanent employment for people. That's one of our core beliefs. So, you know, its core belief is that poverty alleviation, community employment. And so we look for value-aligned organizations that are interested in that same mandate. We look for organizations that do have an appetite for some risk and growth. I think that's a really important mindset, and we'll probably talk about that a bit later. And from there, you know, we work with a partnership to take slow steps forward into starting, so that, you know, there's an initial investment in the model and proprietary information. And then there's a percentage of sales that comes back to us in perpetuity for the continued support that we offer.
Awesome. So ours is similar. And I think that's what's really lovely about the contrast between the two models is that basically the way that we work is that you actually buy an exclusive territory. So you're actually awarded it. And we have Gigi, who's actually part of our franchising team, who's with us on today. And so the first interaction would be with Gigi, so that you would go through an entire recruitment process. And we're really looking for organizations and people who have grit, so the perseverance to do this work, because it's a lot of work to run a business. And the other side is to have the big heart. We believe wholeheartedly that we can train everything else when it comes to the business technicalities and how to run a home care business, but we can't teach values. Right. So we want to start with those great people, which is why, you know, working with social enterprises and nonprofits is great. So we have a commitment to DEI ownership. So that's going to be BIPOC ownership as well as social enterprise models. And across our network right now, we have 79% of our franchises are owned by females. That's versus 17% of all businesses. And then we're 44% are BIPOC owned versus 4% of all businesses. So, and we also have 3 of our 41 locations are owned by charities and nonprofits. So they're actually social enterprise models on that. So we prioritize that. When someone buys a full territory, we train them, we onboard them, we support them in their growth of their business. And then it is basically a royalty and a marketing fee, just like any franchise system would be. So it's roughly like 3.9, well, I'll give the exact, just 3.95 to 4.95% of your top line revenue, and then 1% marketing fund. And that marketing fund is collected from all our franchisees that we're actually building a beautiful new website. And I know the link is in there. And we're actually doing Facebook ads and things that actually promote the brand nationally.
Wow, it's incredible. So then is a lot of it managed with head office? Like, what about software and systems? Is that all part of the head office, and then the franchise or license model gets part of that software too?
Yeah, that's right. So franchise and license, well, I won't speak for Rebecca, but for franchising, it's all about processes. So the processes of marketing and best practices on that, the processes of operations and best practices on that, and then also the peer support. I actually know some of our franchise partners are in the Zoom room right now. And so they're excited about making a difference. They're excited about being in relationship with each other. And so you're not by yourself. You're actually part of a network of over 40 successful business owners who are making a difference in their individual communities.
Yeah, I'd wholeheartedly agree with that, Carla. And just I know we're going to get on our soapbox of social franchise later, but Carla and I are both so passionate about the concept of franchising, because packaging up the learnings into one centrally located spot where You've got the skill set of people already working on all those processes, procedures, exactly as Carla's saying, websites, online store, back-end information. That's all happening in one centrally located location so that everybody who's working in the individual enterprises, social enterprises or franchise locations can actually do the work that they're called to do, right? Accomplish the social mission. Those are really two completely different skill sets. And so, yeah, very passionate about the concept of how franchising really can help our sector get to the next stage.
Totally. Last year we did our social enterprise state of the sector ecosystem report. And one of the biggest issues that came up was capacity. Whereas with this, like, you've ironed out all the kinks. The business is up and going, you know how it works, you know how to find more clients, you know how to access new markets, you know how to run a business. And it's that shared learning and support network that must be really valuable for all the business owners and people that are doing this work within each of your organizations. My next question is, if someone wants to buy a franchise model from you, obviously it's going to cost money. Like, where does that money come from? Do you raise funds? Do you take on debt? Do you sell some equity? Like, do you have any advice on how did you do it? How much did it cost?
This will probably look quite different for Carla and I, so I'll jump in first, and then Carla, you can finish up. We operate, because we're not 100% self-sustainable through sales at this point. We're a social enterprise that we're about 80% viable through the sales of product. We still operate more in the charitable sector. We're sort of really straddling the charitable sector and the corporate. But we funded our initial growth through grants. And I'm probably resonating a little bit more with the charities that are out there currently. Although in our sector, like, I've just been to so many social finance conferences recently that are talking about all the tools and the ways that you can, use equity or debt financing to move ahead. So I think that's a really important conversation to be watching. But traditionally, as a charitable entity, we're used to getting places with grants. And so for us, the Raw Carrot has been a great, we're really attractive to funders right now for a couple of reasons, right? Like, one, we're high on the innovation side of things. And two, we're working towards self-sustainability. So those are some of the big things in our sector right now, are those two key pieces. So we've felt very confident moving ahead with grant funding for growth. However, having said that, right in our early years, we took a really large loan that we were able to access. It was a zero interest loan at the time that allowed us to invest in pieces that we knew we were going to pay off. So, again, just looking at the risk factor and being willing to invest in the growth of what you need. So, for us, buying soup pouches was way more economical if we utilized economies of scale. So if I only bought 500 soup pouches at a time, I was paying $2 a pouch. And if I bought 20,000 soup pouches at a time, we were paying 28 cents. So utilizing those economies of scale makes so much sense. So we took a large zero interest loan. We paid it off over about 3 years. And so I think there are different ways, a couple different tools that can be used for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so ours is a little bit different. There's actually two parts to finance for us. So we actually wrote the book about how to raise the money to do this. So I put that in the chat. And it's basically what we ended up doing is to do a social acquisition. I spoke to 187 charities and 3 said yes. Then we also had 9 impact investors in order to actually assemble all the money in order to buy this business. So that's how we did it. So we didn't start from scratch, right? So in that case, but what's kind of interesting, we're actually going to the States right now. So as we enter into the States, I've had to create a separate entity, and we're actually fundraising again right now from charities primarily in order to actually get equity. So it's a direct equity investment in entering the States. And then when we make profit, those are dividends that actually go to the arm's length charity that are legally allowed to invest in direct equity into a business because you are an accredited investor as a charity. So only accredited investors can do direct equity investments in things like this. And so that means a charity that has over $150,000 in investable reserves or cash reserves, you can actually invest in a business. You could actually buy a local business in order to actually convert it into a values-aligned social enterprise. If you were starting from scratch, the caveat of starting a franchisor, so like the head office of McDonald's, a franchisor, you actually have to have a financially viable, so creating profit at a certain size that is actually attractive for other people to replicate your model. So you would have to probably demonstrate that you have $500,000 of net income or something like that a year, maybe $250,000, and then you could actually become a franchise model that other people would invest, because it has to be an investment that you're at that point. So you would have to get to a point where you've proven a business model in order to have the replication model. If you are interested in doing franchising, obviously we've already paid for the paperwork to get all of our legalities in place, and I'm happy to have that conversation with people. So that's the franchisor level if you're looking at that replication. If you're looking at buying a franchise, there's many different opportunities. I know that some of the credit unions right now, specifically Alterna, is actually creating a franchise financing arm.
Wow.
Yeah, so on the microfinancing side and how they can do things differently. I also know that there's a lot of community foundations that would actually be interested in having a nonprofit or social enterprise or any marginalized, like anyone who isn't actually able to actually purchase it themselves, to actually support them in creating wealth. So that's another opportunity in there. And then in some cases, you might actually have an impact investor. So there's different funds. I know in Victoria, there's the Scale Collaborative and the Thrive Impact Fund that actually promotes local ownership and promotes social enterprise development. So you might have something local that is a bunch of impact investors who would actually support you in thinking differently this way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, when I talk to a lot of nonprofits, it's kind of a different mindset, and trying to explain that when you do a social acquisition, when you buy a business, you're not taking on debt, you're buying assets, you're buying a revenue stream. So trying to reframe it that way, as opposed to like, oh, I'm just taking on a whole bunch of debt. It's like, no, you're going to be making revenue from this, and it's a much more entrepreneurial way of thinking. And if you create more revenue, you can create more impact and put it back into your mission, your purpose.
I just want to add on to that, because one big objection that we see is that when you buy a business, you're like, well, there, the money's gone. No, it's still an asset.
Yeah.
Like the value of the business that you just bought doesn't go because you just bought it. It actually, every single dollar that you increase in revenue in the acquired business actually adds value to it. So you're adding not only existing cash flows, but also capital gains.
Thank you. I'm just thinking, Rebecca, you've been through this experience, and what are the key considerations when deciding to go down the social enterprise franchise route, and what do you wish you had known in advance?
Yeah, you could hear this question a number of different ways depending on coming from this. I'm not sure how many of their running social enterprises maybe and thinking of scaling. And so maybe if I was going to gear the question that way, what would I wish that I'd known? I mean, sometimes ignorance is bliss, because had I known everything, I may not have jumped in here into this space, because it's such a big leap from starting one single social enterprise to starting, a social franchise. That really is a way more massive leap than I ever would have imagined. Having said that, again, I am so passionate about the model that I still think it's worth it. I think coming back to this risk, and Carla said it well, in grit, coming back to that type of mentality. And we see this with our partnerships, because we partner in with communities of faith and other charities. Charities tend to have a program mindset. They're used to having like a sustained stream of donations coming in, and they plan programs based on a program mindset. And we really have a lot of conversations at the beginning about having a more entrepreneurial mindset, and really needing to have that grit factor in there, and being willing to take risks. Like, it just, it is risky. We run the Raw Carrot like a business. It's always run like that. Yeah, so I think that's really important. I think the skill set, it's really important to talk about skill set of people on board, right? And having started this at the outset, I wouldn't have realized that necessarily. I realized it further down the road. I'm more of I'm a shiny ball chaser. I'm like the visionary of like, let's see what we can do. And I started this with a co-founder, luckily, that was an operations person. And she was she was like the no side of things. She was the one who was like, no, we have to have process. No, we need to stick to the plan. No, we need a strategic objective. Like you need a specific skill set for launching these and really going big. And so I think I didn't probably realize that as much at the outset as I do now. And if you haven't read the book Predictable Success, that was probably one of the best business books I've ever read, talking about sort of the three personalities or skill sets needed to run and scale an entity. That's a great book, but skill set is important, and having people who can really do the number crunching, people who can look at all there's lots of business pieces. This is not just the social side is actually the easiest side of what we do. We did the social side for about the first 3 years, and we were like, wow, the social, we've accomplished completely the objectives of being able to create jobs, sustain them, have people, stay in work, relieve poverty, and have community. Those were the easy pieces to accomplish. The business side for us was way more the harder side of things, and continuing to grow and innovate constantly, and keep up with like logistical considerations and compliance and health and safety regulations. All of these things we do at the headquarters. So packaging it up and being able to share those learnings was really important.
Yeah, thank you for those insights. Carla, how about you? What do you wish you had known in advance?
Well, I might start where Rebecca ended off on like the rabbit hole, because I think the rabbit hole of good we can do by actually thinking in this way is so much more than I originally thought it would be. Like I didn't understand that when we are a social enterprise at the scale that we are, and we make different business decisions, the ripple effects that has on everyone. And I'm not even including the ripple effects of our dividends. But like, who are our vendors? Okay, social procurement, right? Like, who are our partners? Even the sustainable competitive advantage that we have as a social enterprise in working with other nonprofits, because right away we have the common value set that we can actually do more together and have that trust to do bigger and better things. It's just, and then also what Rebecca was saying is that we actually have the entrepreneurial mindset. So we're actually moving so fast. So imagine collaboration on steroids, which is an amazing thing to do. So the rabbit hole of impact is way bigger. That I wish I had known that. And it was the social part that was the easy part. I think the thing that I wish that I had done was slow down. So one thing that we're really, really good at as social enterprise leaders is we are literally, cleaning the bathrooms and then coming up with the strategic plan. And I think in the first 18 months, we call it the whack-a-mole here, like things were popping up and we were just like trying to bat it down. I wish I had taken a deeper breath and done more of the strategic planning at that time. I will say that now our team's at this place, and it is a pleasure to do the strategic planning with the team and focus on co-creation and living into the values that we've been talking about. Oh, actually, I'm going to end with where Rebecca started, actually, of the things that I'm glad I didn't know about. I am so glad that I didn't know it was impossible to buy a business in less than 90 days. We waived all conditions in 82 days, and I had no idea that was impossible. So thank goodness for that. I also had no idea about franchising. I didn't know anything about it. And I think that allowed me to bring the value set of being a social enterprise about change management, actively listening, putting people first. I won't call us a franchise system. Everyone else does. We call it a franchise network because it actually has human beings. And because I didn't know anything about franchising, that's how I think of it. And I also didn't know anything about home care. So thank the goodness for that, because again, I didn't have any expectations of what good home care looked like. So I thought it should be up here. And so now when we continue to deliver at that level, and we're the only 5-star Google rated home care business that's national, it's because I didn't know anything about the industry. And so my expectations were much higher.
I read your Win-Win Capitalism. It's wonderful. I recommend everyone read it. And there was a section about, it was an acquisition. So how did it feel to the employees that were already part of the network when there was a new boss? Was there any big shifts there?
Yeah, always. And so there's some franchise partners on this call, and some of our team from National is on the call as well. And yeah, I think that one thing that we really focused on coming in was what was the corporate culture we wanted to be moving forward. And so you've probably all heard like culture eats strategy for breakfast. And there's some of my past colleagues who are probably laughing at that. And so when we came in talking about the numbers are important. I mean, we're all in social enterprise here. We know that if we don't have financial sustainability, we can't do the good that we want to see in the world. Right. So that's there. But when we came in, we started to actually enter meetings. Instead about talking the numbers, we would actually ask our franchise partners, what are you proud of? And so when you think about your values, your vision, your mission, but then also your rituals and your practices, and when you're consistent about naming the things that we actually hold dear, as opposed to just naming numbers, we now talk about the number of people that we've served. We know that last year we actually supported over 400,000 hours of support for families across the country who needed that extra care. All of a sudden, that is a much more important number than what the financials are.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay. Rebecca, how do you maintain that it's always a social enterprise? Like when we talk about the difference between a social enterprise and a traditional business, like as the business expands, how do you maintain that it stays true to social enterprise values?
This is the easy one for this. We 100% that is always rolled into what we're doing. And maybe that's because we're not yet in a place where we're rolling over lots of profits. But for us, like every single decision that we make in every single case comes back to our social mission. So if we are not creating more jobs and more hours of work for those that are disadvantaged and living in poverty and trying to move that needle forward, that's not a decision we can make. So there's been lots of decisions that might have made more business sense along the way, that might have helped us grow faster. But if those decisions weren't in the best interest of the people that we are serving, and I love that Carla uses the word serving, we are all here serving people who deserve more, and that we're passionate and so, touched by every single day. And so if every single decision is not being rolled back into trying to make that possible, it's not a decision that we make. And so just keeping in mind all the time that social mission is how we make every single decision. And then the growth, it's not growth for, and not that the profit isn't important. It is how much profit and revenue we have means that we can grow further and faster. So those things are important, equally important. But for us then, it's just rolling back into the social mission of how many more jobs we can create to lift people out of poverty.
Thank you.
Similarly, like I think that's exactly right. Like I love all decisions are based on values. Like we hire people based on values. We recruit franchise partners based on values. And whenever there's a decision, we always ask, is it people first? And we know we're not going to be perfect, but we know that every day we can get better, and we keep on questioning that. I think other things that I've really learned from the nonprofit world that is so important as a for-profit social enterprise is we don't talk about target markets. We talk about stakeholder analysis. So how does our work not just impact one person, but like who are all the people and how are the communities and neighborhoods impacted by that? We also, as a for-profit, haven't forgotten a theory of change. So we actually have a theory of change. Our vision is to change the narrative around aging. So that means that we do advocacy. That means that we actually have an event calendar for online activities for seniors that they can actually do from anywhere. Another home care company, because they don't have a theory of change that's rooted in the vision of changing the narrative of aging, you wouldn't then make those decisions. So I love how Rebecca, it's the values decisions, and then how do you continue to like the theory of change, and everything is then makes it easier for anyone on my staff or our team to make the right decision or the best decision for what we're hopeful of.
Thank you. So looking at the audience of who's here today, I know there's, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of leaders from social enterprise, and maybe they're thinking of, should they expand? Should they grow? Should they scale? Should they buy a franchise? Do you have any advice to give them, or how do you know if someone's ready to do social enterprise franchising?
I can just I think I understood really clearly at the start how much process there needs to be and how embedded it needs to be. To launch for example, we're a food-based entity. When you're first operating in the food space and you're just selling in your local community, there's not a lot of regulations when you're small scale. As soon as you start to expand, you get into a whole different ballpark, and those circular rings just continue to grow. So, at first we listed our nutrition, like we listed the ingredients in the soup. The next piece of that was, we decided to put a nutritional panel on the back of our soup so that we could sell retail, and we had a GS1 license, which meant we could sell across Canada as part of a national recall program. Well, that's great, but that means then you can only have certain ingredients in your soups, and they need to be compliant with those types of things. I think those levels were not clear to me initially. And again, we're operating in the food space, and maybe that's one of the things that if I went back, I'm not sure. Food is very complex, and the amount of risk around food is complicated. And so, those are just some of the pieces that as we continue to expand, and then, we're looking outside of provincial territories as well for expansion. You just get into a whole new level of compliance everywhere you go. And so those pieces, if you're thinking of scaling, in hindsight, I probably should have looked at those sooner than later, and yet we're scaling and we're still catching up in some of those ways. So that'd be one of the things I'd recommend.
I love this is our soapbox, Rebecca. This is our soapbox. This is the leveling up too. I love this conversation, Rebecca, because whenever I hear you speak, I hear the same learning that we had. And so I think that's a really important thing that if you hear from this webinar is that the learnings of scale are really similar, of the rigor, the compliance, the leveling up that happens as you grow. So how do you know you're ready? I think our soapbox is that if you are interested in doing a food social enterprise and scaling, you actually have a resource. If you're looking at social franchising and getting into the nitty-gritty of franchising, you have a resource. And no one needs to be alone in this work. It takes a lot of resources in order to scale up. For franchising, how do you know you're ready? We look at recruitment as twofolds for someone who's actually going to buy a franchise with us. The first question is, as a charity or nonprofit or individual, are you ready to buy a business? Are you really going to do a for-profit social enterprise? And then once you've decided that, then talk to us. I mean, we can have research, read the book, and then talk to us. Because I think saying that is just like family for me or not, that's not really that's not really the point. We have to figure out whether or not actually buying a business for your nonprofit. And so that's when you get your board, that's when you do the education, that's when you do a lot of the change management. Only then are you looking, is the franchise an opportunity for me, or is there another business in my local area? That's the change that I'm seeking to see, is a systemic change of how can we grow faster. On a soapbox side, if I had started Just Like Family from scratch, it took the founder of this business from 2010 until 2019 to start to franchise, right? We bought this business in 2022 and have almost doubled. We've actually grown 77% from the moment that we actually signed the letter of intent to buy this. Wow. So that amount of impact to be less than 2 years in that time, we couldn't have done from scratch in that time. So that's what I get excited about, the scale of social franchising and the scale of social acquisitions.
Thank you. Rebecca, maybe now you can get on your soapbox.
Yeah. I just echo exactly what Carla said. I mean, we ran this like a business from day one. So for me, I didn't have an organization that was behind us supporting this. I don't know if people, you're already at part of nonprofits and charities. This started as a side hustle for me because I was passionate about one person that I knew. So, my roller coaster ride of starting this without any backing, without any investment, without any charity, without a salary, meant that sometimes I was paid, sometimes I was paid a little, sometimes I wasn't paid. All the risk I owned. Those initial 5 years were really, really fun because investing in something innovative and really pouring your heart and soul into something is amazing. But I think, that had its moments too. When it was fun to start, and then when I wasn't being paid anymore, it wasn't fun, because we just realized how much work the franchising, even running a social enterprise was. I mean, 80% of small businesses fail. Like the failure rate is really, really high. And yet as a sector, we're dumping money into the innovation of starting individual social enterprises. There's good there, creativity is good and encouraging innovation is great. And it was fun personally. So who am I to say that we shouldn't be doing it? But at the same time, I think the learning for me was, wow, this was way, way harder than I expected, especially without backing or funding. Getting there, trying to get there on $5,000 and $10,000 grants was, hard work. And so really, like, having that either investment behind you or a really strategic partner. Similarly, I agree with Carla, there's so much more of an appetite for investment, individual investors, community foundations that are willing to look at this, but we're not looking at $5,000 and $10,000 grants. We're looking like $60,000 or plus. Like, you need a big investment. You're starting a proven model of something that you're trying to jump into. So really getting people on board that can see the value in that is really, really important.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm just looking at the chat here. There's some questions coming in. The Raw Carrot is a nonprofit, correct?
Correct. So we are technically a charity. All the people that we partner with are technically charities. We are not at the place of complete financial sustainability, and we can look at that in all kinds of ways. But if we're trying to cover every single cost through the sales of earned income and sales of product, we're about 80% there. So that's sort of the brief on what we do.
Mm-hmm. And then separate to that, Just Like Family Home Care is a for-profit, but it's majority owned by nonprofits. And then the franchisees they vary between nonprofits and for-profit ownership.
That's right. Yeah. And I just think, yeah. And so because we are for profit, we continue to grow. You can see we have a lot of tailwinds. So any charity that does invest in one of our franchises, it is an investment. So when Rebecca was talking about programs before, like, this is actually an investment. And that's hard for definitely investment committees to understand, if it even gets there. Oftentimes we're having, membership votes and things like that, which we kind of say, well, you never did a membership vote on the GIC you invested it in for the next 10 years. So it's kind of interesting that when we think about all the abundance that we actually have as the nonprofit and charitable sector, there are ways that we could unleash that to actually create even more impact. I was speaking to like my team, and I would say every single one of my team members would agree that they make a difference every single day. They either do it directly with a senior or someone who is disabled in their lives and supporting them more, which then has ripple effects on the families, ripple effects on like their neighbors and the community, ripple effects on the caregivers and their staff, right? So every single day, all the people that we're able to impact in this model, instead of the charities who invested in us, they didn't choose a GIC, they chose this.
Thank you. Okay, we got 15 minutes left. I'm happy to take some questions from all the participants. If anyone has any questions or something that hasn't been addressed yet that we can spotlight right now, or
I would love to address the question that I see that came into the chat, talking about the private sector has a benchmark of net profits clustered. So when you're a social franchise, we're seeing a few things that you wouldn't expect. So when you're treating people better in home care, guess what? Our care is better. Our clients are nicer. This all has ripple effects on that side. In terms of the percentage of our net income, yes, we're industry standard, and yet we're paying our staff 20 to 25% higher than our competition. So it is almost like having your cake and eating it too. In addition to that, our social enterprise charitable owned franchises actually grew faster than our other private franchises. The reason being is they not only had capital, they had social capital. And then you also have the values alignment and the trust, knowing that that's going to be a possibility.
Yeah, reputation would be a big asset going into this work, especially considering the services that you provide at Just Like Family Home Care. Reputation is key. Rebecca, do you want to say anything?
You know, are there years when franchises or licenses are not profitable? And how do you handle that in terms of fees, especially in the early years, and to support like different from year one to future years? So again, Carla and I probably have similar and yet differing answers. Again, like probably the benefit of a franchise model is that we've got 10 years now of understanding what the structure looks like. So there's not a lot of guesswork for us anymore in launching a social enterprise. And having said that, like we're babies, right? We've launched 4 of these. So Carla can speak much more to the, we're a work integration social enterprise. That's a very specific model. Then we had 2 years of COVID, and last year we took a break to work more on profit margin. But we still, when we look at our, our numbers and our financials, we can predict what is pretty much, very, very accurately what's going to happen in your social enterprise. So I mean, for us, we've got that 5-year forecast that's like, this is what you need to invest in the beginning. This is how much money you need every single year. You need half of that in the bank over the first 3 years in order to launch. By year 5, you're going to be, 80% financially viable. And then you need a plan for your 20%. How's that contribution gonna be coming ongoing? While we, as the headquarters, continue to work on profit margins so that we can hopefully get you to 100%. We started at 100, wages went up and cost of goods went up, and we went back down to 80. So that's what the headquarters does. But yes, we can lay that out as a full plan so that you understand exactly what your losses and then eventual, profits or revenue is going to look like.
That sounds wonderful. Like the mentorship, given the fact that most businesses, when they start, they're not going to see a profit for at least 2 to 5 years. Having someone holding your hand and saying, don't worry, it'll come. You're on the right path. This is the trajectory. Like we can predict that this is how it's going to go. That would be so beneficial.
Yeah. And again, to piggyback off what Carla said, just this, like having a network of people that you work with. We similarly meet monthly with all of our social enterprises to learn from one another and continue to, support. So the support never ends, because the success of each entity is also the success of the headquarters. So you're intimately tied, the two of you. So that support is an ongoing piece. It's not like you launch a social enterprise or a franchise and then you're hands off. That headquarters operational model is always there, because your and their success are tied together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And my existing franchise partners, they actually love being a mentor to the newbies. They love it. It's so amazing. And they've been there. Like we literally just before this call, we had a gathering of some of our community health managers, and they were sharing stories of when they've been caregivers themselves and how they actually have the lived experience of doing the care and like how that has actually impacted them. And so, yeah, when you actually do that work but they are a community with each other. There's head nodding, and I think there's joy. And in many cases, I've heard the word actually love comes up, which is not what you think about when you think about business.
That's wonderful. Okay, I see a few hands up. Tracy, did you have a question related to social enterprise franchise models?
No, I didn't have a question. I just wanted to share with Rebecca and Carla and the team a fabulous book my mentor gave me called Rocket Fuel, which is something that talks about, Rebecca said, the procedures of different personalities, where you need the creativity, but you also need it, the procedures and protocols. And if you don't have both specifically, you can't hit the rocket fuel of your company. Anyway, it is a fantastic book to show trajectory and why both sides of the partnership, or the multiple different approaches to partnership, how they blend together, whether it's franchising, licensing, or just expanding nationally or globally. So I'll put it in the chat. It's a great read.
Thanks, Tracy.
Yeah.
Gerbine, I see your hand is up as well.
Hey, oh my goodness, some of my favorite people, Carla, Rebecca, so good, so great to see you both. So I really am sort of at that sweet spot of scaling, and then potentially thinking about, I don't know about whether it's going to be licensing or social franchising or any of the above. But my question really is to both of you. I think that the struggle is really, like, there's so many people talking about investment, but no one's really talking about procurement, right? So Rebecca, you and I both are in the food business. Carla, you and I are both in the service industry as well, right? So we have both at Ungan. And my question is, how do you deal with procurement for not just obviously for HQ, but for the franchisees, right? Number one. Number two, is like, what's your opinion around scaling as an entity versus franchising as an entity? So I'm just curious to sort of juxtapose both and see what your thoughts are around that. Thank you.
I can start on the first one, maybe, and then maybe we'll break them apart. So on procurement, it is about what are our decisions about education. So it's basically a network of 41 locations. We're head office, and we spend time to educate and to provide resources. We also have preferred vendors, right? So, and then on the preferred vendors, you can go two ways. So as Rebecca was talking about, like franchising, we do have a little bit more control where we can actually elect whether or not someone has a preferred vendor that we recommend. And then there's ones that we can actually mandate that they have. And then we can make those decisions that way. We have our royalties and marketing funds that we then disperse, and we treat those funds as a way to continue to animate the social enterprise space. So I come to all the community roundtables trying to look for vendors who would actually fit some of our procurement needs. So not only do I then speak to hospitals and anyone who might procure from us as a partner, like ICBC, I know is actually one of the members. So yes, we have a contracts with them, right? So we have a relationship there, but also seeing that we're a large social enterprise, how our role is not only on people purchasing from us, but who we purchase from, and having the options based on the franchising model. So I might just answer the first question, pass on to Rebecca, and then we'll go on the next one.
Maybe just to piggyback, and let me maybe just start by saying how, like, it is so humbling to be on this call with so many social enterprise leaders and charity leaders from across Canada, because you know, there's people I admire, like Gerbine, all across here that are listening. And so, you know, this is never to me like just a dissemination of our learnings, but it's always just the shared learnings that help us get better in every step of the way. But I guess my question, first of all, were you speaking like of like the headquarters procuring on behalf of everybody else, or the sales and diversification strategies? Sales and diversification.
Sales,
so the
yeah,
second.
thank you.
Yeah. So two different things, but I mean, we've gone down the path of all sorts of trials, like as you do as we iterate and innovate, but you know, from like farmers markets and community sales to then branching into retail networks in hopes of having wide distribution frameworks, and then going down the online store and owning that path ourselves. So I think there's learnings in all of those things for us. And one of the things that I am strong on, though, is like the diversification of sales pathways. I think it's important. COVID taught us that more than anything else, right? Having a diversification of strategies is important to ensure that we can like make ourselves strong, so that if one revenue stream is cut off, we're not left stranded. We were really, really glad for our online store in COVID. Retail was great for us at one period of time when we'd hoped to have a great distribution network. What we learned over time was that the margins on retail, when retail take like a minimum of 30%, you need nutritional panels and a GS1 license and the ability to do at least a first step back contact tracing, or maybe 2 steps back for food-based. Retail becomes really, really complicated. And the margins, honestly, like we consider it a loss leader for us. It's a way for us to have product in the market It's a way for people to access what we have, and we drive them elsewhere. So it's, you know, it's sitting out there. We want to drive people in and we want the visibility. But pretty much retail for us is almost it's pretty much break even. Our other diversification pathways are much more profitable. And so, you know, we focus on the other diversification pathways, but we keep retail as a loss leader. So I'm not sure if that's answers exactly what you mean. We've not really, and I mean, I know Buy Social has really worked on sort of more large scale contracts, and you, Gerbine, probably, I think you guys have way more large scale contracts. We're more we've done a lot more consumer to consumer business. So I guess focusing on, you know, first of all, what is your strategy? What do you think is most effective? Or testing a market slowly, like, is this a strategy that works? We've done a lot of testing, and we sort of know what works for us and what doesn't based on the product that we have.
Thanks, Rebecca. I know that's really valuable information, given that food and catering is probably one of the largest types of goods and services that social enterprises do sell and manufacture. So hearing like, what are those barriers and how can you get past them and, you know, still be successful is really key. Okay, let's go to part 2 of that question. Carla.
I might need Gerbine to re-say it.
I know.
Okay, so yes, it's the question of scaling, like actually scaling, like one enterprise. So let's say the work that we do, scaling that versus starting down the franchise road. Because, you know, I have opinions on both, and I've learned a lot about both, and I'm really curious to see what your both thoughts are around what that would look like.
Just for context, for everyone that doesn't know Gerbine is the executive director of Ongen. Ongen's in Toronto, and they operate multiple social enterprises. They do cleaning, they do wholesale foods, and they do food and catering as well. So they already have multiple businesses. So that obviously it's very topical for Gerbine to ask this question, and it's very relevant for many other people on this call too.
So if we're looking at that continuum again, I might throw that link up again. Really, what it comes down to is whose money is scaling it, what the control is behind that, and then and what the upside is. So if you're owning everything, you're going to need more money at the front end, but then you could potentially have a higher return in the long run, and you have more control over everything, so that you're hitting certain consistent quality. We started this webinar actually saying that we don't need to own everything. That is actually a very important principle around franchising, is actually we're better together. And this understanding that the model that we have in Just Like Family, yes, we have, you know, this is how branding works, this is how service, this is what the process looks like. And yet every single franchisee, we call it your superpower, brings their superpower to the table in their neighborhood that they contextualize. As we know, that's the challenge, right? Every neighborhood and every community is so different. So a cafe in Newfoundland is going to look very different than in Victoria, right? So for us, the beautiful thing about franchising, so you can tell I have a little bit of a bias here, is that we're able to share the wealth. We're able to actually then grow with people's investments, that they're actually building their own generational or community wealth. And then we also can see that they can contextualize it based on the needs and what their own superpowers are. So in some places, our franchise partners are working with hospitals. In some places, they're working with occupational therapists. In some places, their best friends are actually insurance brokers. Like, it doesn't really matter. It's who they're the best at talking to, so we can communicate the value and actually continue to provide value in the neighborhood and communities that we're serving.
Thank you so much. We are at time. This conversation could easily go on so much longer, but that's a wonderful way to tie in where we began versus where we are now. And that social enterprises really are there to create impact that goes beyond one individual. So thank you both so much for speaking. And thanks everyone for listening. I hope it was valuable. And we'll have more webinars like this later in the year. So please, if you're not already subscribed to our newsletter, subscribe, stay in the loop, and we look forward to our next learnings. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.